All right. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm wondering if we have a committee member who would like to call us to order.
I can do so. This is Celeste. Hi, everyone. And it's 2:05 today. We'll begin the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Celeste. And I'll turn it over to Melissa for roll call.
Thank you, Celeste and Jared. Brian reminded me that Lawrence might be at the CGIS meeting, so he might not be able to join us right away. I'll do roll call. So we have Zan Ojero. Present. Janine Hartley. Celeste Jansen.
Present.
Robin Johnson. Andy Leonard. Jeff Parker.
Present.
Andy Santana May. Koi Vu. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. And we don't have Lawrence on yet, right? Doesn't look like it. Okay, great. So we'll introduce Lawrence in a bit. I think most of you have met Lawrence, Lawrence White. He is the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Coordinator, the position that was previously occupied by Sanji, and he's going to start joining us on these meetings and being more involved in this work. So we'll introduce him as soon as he jumps on. I think now we can move to a review of accomplishments. So we just wanted to take a moment in this meeting and really review what this committee has done so far. I actually went back and I looked, and this committee has been meeting for just over a year now. Time flies. And it's been no small feat during that time. You've accomplished quite a bit. You've established this committee as part of the strategic plan, came up with an equity statement and a purpose for this committee. You've developed a new land acknowledgement guidance toolkit, and you've developed an equity lens document. Just for public record, for anybody who's joining, those documents were approved at our March council meeting at the Youth Development Council. And so those are documents that we've officially adopted and will work from. So just wanted to kind of give a moment to everyone to reflect on that. Figured this would probably be a good time now that we have gone over those first few hurdles of accomplishing those initial tasks of resetting, and we really wanted to take this meeting to talk about what's next for this committee and what's our next project. What do we want to take on? And we have some topics that we wanted to discuss with you in that regard, but just wanted to take a moment first and see if anyone had any reflections on what has been accomplished over the last year.
I'll jump in. I have been pretty impressed with how much we've gotten done, especially since it's been challenging sometimes to get together. And we had very productive discussions, and then staff were able to go away, take away that input and put together various drafts of materials, which I think is what made it work for all of us. Thank you very much to all the staff. I'm excited about that, but I'm also excited to start looking at some of the data that we see and how this philosophical framework shows up in our actual work.
Thank you, Commissioner Ojero. Yes. Anyone else?
So Leslie, it looked like you were moving for the mute buttons. I'm sorry to jump in front of you. I just want to reiterate what Zan mentioned around the heavy lift that the staff did here. The committee may get some credit for the work, but we wouldn't have been able to accomplish a quarter of what we did without the work behind the scenes, and both sort of tactically, but also foundationally in terms of getting those things ready for us to come in and help work with. We merely assisted.
Yeah.
I appreciate the sentiment that both Jeff and Zan have shared, and I absolutely agree. I really think the intention behind our equity statement was really neat. I appreciated that we were really trying to be thoughtful about, in different circumstances, what's the best way to approach it. So I think the hard work begins, but I really like that we were intentional on developing some ground statements, some ground language to use, and now we can be much more intentional in the future about thinking about the application.
Great. All right. Anyone else have anything before we move on? All right. I think we'll move on to future meeting planning. So this takes us into really just thinking about where we're going. What's the direction of this committee as we move forward? We've moved to quarterly meetings now that we've sort of gone over those. Now that we've accomplished those initial tasks, this meeting was rescheduled from the May meeting. So our next meeting will be the last week of August. So that will be in 1 month, and then we'll continue with the quarterly cadence after that, just so you're aware. But one thing that is probably going to come up over the next few months is sovereign nation funding. And want to turn it over. Brian, are you able to give an update on some of the plans for sovereign nation funding?
Yeah, I can real quickly. I think I kind of hit some of this at the last quarterly meeting. We wanted to get through the RFA process and knew too that it was going to basically be during this current, now that the new biennium has started, this current biennium to kind of get this project, this initiative, this effort around sovereign nation funding going, and it really wouldn't be until 25, 27 until we get to a place where we can. My son is bringing me some smoothie. Aren't I lucky? Lime and watermelon. Sorry, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but that was delivered. We will start, I think, end of summer, fall. I think we now have a little more capacity and space to kind of get this work group moving and get that work going. And again, I say the biennium, but the reality is by next spring, we need to have a pretty clear idea on what we want to do, some kind of framework for what it might look like, because it's at that point that if we need to develop a policy option package to request money or may say more money, we need to have that more or less drafted in order to hit some of the internal timelines we have with the policy work that Department of Education is key to, and the governor's office, blah, blah, blah. So I think we're now at the point where getting that work group, I know Andy Leonard had said that he wanted to be a part of it. I can't remember if others on the call said that they were interested, but that's really our key thing, is to get the work group meeting pulled together in the coming, I'll say, month or two. It could maybe it's probably not going to be in August, probably more like September, and then have a few meetings around that, develop some ideas. We will need to do some more actually more formal consultation with the sovereign tribes. We've though met with tribes. Part of the other thing that we were doing this spring and summer was we had met with 4 or 5 of the 9 federally recognized tribes in the fall of 2022, but still had some tribes that we weren't able to connect with. So we connected with those folks, those tribes, in this sort of more early summer. I went on a trip in June, got one more tribe, Burns Paiute, to connect with, which Paul Sell and Anya Sukino are going to be doing, just to kind of put this basic idea out. So we're continuing to make progress, but again, work group, early fall, late summer, early fall, and we'll try to keep the momentum going.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions on that? Not seeing any. All right. Another thing that will probably come back to this committee for advice on is council recruitment. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill for that.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, this is just a quick plug for something you're all familiar with because you wouldn't be here if you hadn't gone through it. But we're recruiting for council positions that are terming out, and just basically if just to put it on your radar that if you know of any good candidates, any thoughts on potential folks that you think would be a good fit, that you know, reach out or let us know. And that's about as that's kind of my, I'll kick it back to Brian because he has a little more insight into it. And Brian, why don't, my plug's done.
Well, you basically did it. Just we've said this at council meetings, and you know, I had a bunch of folks that I thought were kind of primed. Some of those folks now, a few months later, are not as responsive. Maybe that's summer, I'm not sure, but got one person who has reconnected with me that I met in the fall of 2022, and we've got a few folks who, it's just some applications for the council kind of come over the transom without much effort on our part. So far, they're tending to be kind of very Portland metro area focused, and we could do some to recruit some members from outside of the metro area. So we're keeping at it, but just wanted to put in a plug. As Bill, you did a great job. If you have candidates or someone who might be a link to it, I would say email me and Melissa, email anybody, you can, whoever email you have, and let us know.
Hey, Brian, I'm curious. I thought we had done some of this work. Is there like a matrix of subject matter expertise that we're trying to bring, or other sort of characteristics that we're looking for council members?
That's a good reminder, Jeff. I think actually maybe out of the last council meeting, we have kind of an internal spreadsheet that we've got organized around a kind of our current council membership, and maybe Melissa, maybe this is something we could consolidate in some fashion and say, because the council is also our state advisory group, and the state advisory group is a function of the federal dollars that we administer. There are some specific categories. So we need, you know, for example, somebody from the kind of broadly represent the judicial perspective, and retired Judge Abernethy was good. It was worked in that regard, but she turned off. Law enforcement so there are a couple of just plain missing categories. Now, to be clear, it's not the law enforcement is kind of a subset of this larger like justice and public safety. So we've got a couple of juvenile directors, like, so we're not like doing something, you know, we're skirting anything. But Jeff, I think that's a good reminder of like, we could develop something hopefully in advance of like the executive committee meeting, which then could pinpoint maybe some of the like experience areas / maybe skills. I think folks who are passionate about like strategic planning and things like, given that we're about to kind of get into strategic planning, and Karen Spencer was really great in that regard, probably could use somebody with those kinds of skills and experiences. So we could do a little more work on that. As I said, we kind of have an internal thing that Melissa and I kind of refer to, probably not totally ready for prime time, but we could, I think, clean it up.
Brian, as a part of my work in the youth development sector, I know folks that just work in youth programs all over the state. And so I think folks are really overwhelmed right now and,
Yeah.
have a lot going on in order to just run program. But I do think that if you said, I'm looking for a provider who runs a youth program in a rural community or in Eastern Oregon community or a culturally specific community or a tribal community, I could probably have a lot of leads. So if you want to narrow it down at any way, in terms of those youth serving providers, I could definitely help do some outreach. Whether or not folks have the capacity is always a question.
Thank you, Celeste. Yeah, well, maybe that's kind of, in some ways, the need / opportunity is people in some of those sectors I mentioned around, like kind of public safety, law enforcement, judiciary. I'll have to look back at some of the other categories where we may, like outside of the I-5 corridor. So we can refine the ask a little bit and maybe pinpoint some something, Celeste, that we can share with you, or you and I can offline kind of get maybe there's a little accompanying message we can write to that just can help, so folks have a thing to like forward and send. So
Ryan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
We just happen to be looking at the strategic plan, and there was mention of parents of justice involved youth. Would that still be a need? Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Parent generally, but parent who with the justice or system, some youth serving system, I think would be great.
Great. All right. Thank you all. Anything else before we move on? No? All right. And the next area that we see as potential for this committee to work on, several of you alluded to it in your reflections a few minutes ago, is the equity lens application and where we apply it. And if you recall, in that document that was created, we have scenarios where the equity lens will be applied, in the development of RFAs and recruitment of council members, etc. But I think getting into the how that we do that, and data and what really informs how we are applying that, that's something that will probably come back to this committee as part of our strategic planning process as we're beginning to think about that. And so before we kind of jump into discussion on that, I wanted to hand it over to Cord, because that equity lens application and infusing equity into the strategic plan segues well into what he's going to discuss with you. So I will pass it to Cord to talk about the governor's equity plans.
Sure, thanks. This is, for the record, Cord Bucher, Deputy Director for YDD. And I don't know, I see Andy, you've been able to join us. I'm not sure if we got Andy in the roll call, so just wanted to say hello and welcome you. So yeah, the background to this, the governor's office, the Governor Kotek, has set forth a number of agency expectations. Back in January, when she came into office, she released a list of things that she was calling on all state agencies to do or accomplish, a lot of them within the next year or two. One of those is strategic planning, to have an active, updated strategic plan in place. If you have one that is due for updating, to do that. If you do not have a strategic plan, to create one. Our timing is right. I think that we are ready to work on revisiting and updating our strategic plan, so that we've shared with the governor's office is our intention on that. Another expectation that the governor's office, the governor put forward, was for agencies to have, they've referred to it variously as either an equity plan or a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. They've provided some parameters for that, but it really is meant to be something that fits into how an agency best wants to implement it. So in some cases, like in Oregon Department of Education, they actually have an equity strategic plan. Their strategic plan is their equity plan, and they've combined the two. And that is an option to actually make those two things the same thing. It could also be a standalone DEI plan or equity plan that could be focused on internal or external or both practices of the agency. What we put forward as so essentially, if you don't have a plan, then they asked you to submit a plan to plan. That is what they called it. And so we submitted a plan to plan that was required submission this spring. And we shared that. Hopefully folks have had a chance to look at it. If not, I know we emailed it out to committee members and will also be available. But essentially we provided first some background on how equity actions were taken, identified within the strategic plan that we've been carrying out. And then particular named this committee as one of the results of that in our previous strategic plan, we identified the need for a council committee really focused on equity and addressing disparities as well. And so that restructuring of committees and then the work that your committee has done, we also note in this report. So the creation of the Youth Development Oregon Equity Lens, the adoption of that, other aspects of our work, the sovereignty in our grant agreements with tribes, and some of the work we're doing to align juvenile crime prevention plans and the reduction of racial and ethnic disparities, and the way that we're combining that work. So essentially, we've said, this has factored into our strategic plan. There have been aspects of it. Equity was certainly elevated as both a topic and an important thing that would inform actions in the previous plan. But what we have suggested, our plan for a plan, is that we would come back to this committee and ask you to help us to develop a equity framework for our next strategic plan. So really thinking first to sort of set the ground for strategic planning with the committee and possibly other staff and even involving stakeholders as needed, in a way that would make sure that our strategic plan is aligned with other state DEI and ODEs, equity initiatives, that we're getting the right input on this, and that the strategies that we're putting into our plan are being seen through that equity lens. I appreciated that in the equity lens, you have a list of ways that you want to implement it, that it will be implemented by the council and by the division. And I think a number of these things are bodies of work that we're going to be addressing in strategic planning. They're the ongoing work of the agency. And so, this isn't so much like creating a whole new document, but it's really thinking through, like, how do we, as we begin the strategic planning work, set the stage with equity as like an illuminating principle and as something that is a real guide star for the work, and something that stays like highly relevant and centered as we do that strategic planning work. That is something we're putting forward to the committee. We feel like that makes sense for the committee to do. Hopefully you agree. If the committee did not want to do it, we would still, I think, pursue this in a different way. But I think this is the best place for that work to live, and for a role for the committee to play in supporting the strategic planning process. So I'll pause there, and happy to answer questions about the report we submitted or anything else related to this.
I don't mind jumping in here. When I first saw the agenda for the meeting today, it was this agenda item, future meeting planning and priorities. And then I saw the next email come out. I was like, well, I think we just figured out what our future meeting priorities would be. But I'm very curious what, to your point, there's a lot of different ways that we could approach this, both technically and tactically. And I'm curious what my colleagues here feel is the best approach to it. This does feel like the right committee to take on some or maybe all of it. I don't know. I mean, it also feels a little bit daunting too. And the last thing I would add is the sort of pit in my stomach is that we do a lot of work and it's incongruent or asymmetrical with what the governor wants, and that would feel awful as an end result.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd love to hear from other folks, but I can quickly respond to the last concern that you raised. The governor's office has recently appointed a new director for equity in the governor's office. The title is actually slipping my mind. And as well as her name, I know Brian has participated in training with this individual, and I've heard really good things. And my understanding is, so we've submitted this proposal. We haven't heard anything back, in part because I think that this new appointee is going to be the one to sort of look at these and then provide feedback. And my understanding is that we can certainly ask for guidance and make sure that what we are doing aligns with what the governor wants us to do in this area. There are also pieces of this that aren't really in our scope. So for example, we to some extent can address things like staff recruitment and hiring, but that's also happening through ODE. And so that's informed by ODE's equity strategic plan and their own DEI. There's also ways that we can partner with them, and they have an EDI office and director. So there's pieces that are going to probably live outside of both this committee and outside of our just strategic plan scope. But what we've essentially put forward is that we have to do strategic planning, and we want this to be firmly embedded within it. And we'll see if they feel like that's being done right.
I think it makes a ton of sense to have the equity, diversity, and inclusion framework embedded within the strategic plan, because that's the document that is the primary guiding document, and unless it's embedded there, it's at risk of being shuffled off to the side. So it makes total sense to me to take the approach that you've laid out and putting together an equity framework for that strategic plan. And maybe it's almost the other way around, embedding the strategic plan in the equity, diversity, and inclusion framework. But I think that that's the most effective way to do the work.
I agree. I appreciate the idea of having this committee kind of noodle on a plan or come up with a plan. I also thought about the role of consultants, and if we are bringing in a consultant to do the work, just making sure we really hire someone who understands the equity framework and not just with lip service, but I think the role of having an incredible consultant is important. The other thing, this work is so important, and we've gone through periods of time when it has been not a priority of the governors or not a priority of the legislatures, and we have seen it have cuts. And I always wonder about how do we measure what matters so that we can communicate it effectively, what the dollars do for young people. And I would love to be able to have some way in which we could have case studies, or we could do something that just really helps to use these resources in a way that the governor and the state legislature really sees the value of. And I think if we say that's a reduction in disparities in a particular area, or improving services in a particular area, like whatever it is, there's so many decisions that we could make, but that's always first and foremost on my mind, that the resources that we have are so important and so valuable and so unique in Oregon. And I'd like to make sure that we have continue to be able to fund this incredible work going forward.
Thank you, Celeste. I mean, Bill and Abraham and I were meeting earlier today, and we had some conversation about the strategic plan, and we're just talking about some of what I think are maybe like the I don't know, I call them the pillars of our work. And this is more like they're sort of like the practical things that we do in a broad sense. And one of them, was like really evaluation and how we evaluate, how we, that's reporting, whether it's our analysis of data, whether it's how we tell the story to legislators, to others. That feels like there's pieces like this that I think are kind of these fundamental areas of the work that are things we would be discussing in the planning process. And I think how evaluation and how equity align is really important. And so I think that I appreciate that comment, because I think that's one area where like that's thinking that we ought to do, is how do we make sure those are aligned in whatever we plan to do. Hey, Brian, I see your hand.
Thanks, Cord, and thanks, committee members. I have the pleasure of often talking to Jared and or Bill, and like in advance of these committee meetings, and so this is in my brain. I'm like, wait, probably should have thought about this, and maybe somebody else has. We have the ARC lens, ARC filter. Feels like our first task is to use that filter and the questions to develop a framework or a plan for the plan, or whatever we want to call it, right? Because in some ways that, and for those of you who work with equity, like filters and lenses, like, and I've done some of this work in the past where it's a bit of a tool for analysis, after the fact. Okay, so but I've seen it used in both ways, like as a guiding planning tool, or as a, let's analyze a decision. We have the opportunity right now to say, let's take this set of questions and answer those questions. I would generally say it's and you see a reference in that filter around like process, like, so what kind of planning process, timeline, engagement with other stakeholders, what should that look like? Let's let the tool guide us to some answering questions, so that we say our process and our product needs to do X, Y, and Z in keeping and in alignment with the kind of guidance that those questions provide, if that makes sense. So let's take our filter, and I'm not looking at all the questions, but use that as a critical tool for developing, let's say, the framework of the plan. That's my aha moment.
Well, I think that is a very good idea. It makes total sense. And I was also finding myself thinking, reflecting that if we structure the development of this equity framework using our equity lens actively, we may also find new council members through that process as we engage people with lived experience and in various constituencies for youth development work. So I think we just need to take this as a real opportunity to implement the work that we've done so far, practice it. And I also am going to reflect just a little bit on my experiences from this last week, where I attended a National Association of Counties meeting, and there was a lot of emphasis on busting out those silos between agencies and really thinking about the goals of the work. And so I think that we should also be thinking quite a lot about how to engage with partners inside and outside the division, and making sure that we are addressing some of those root causes that get youth and families in trouble, and prevention. And so that's a huge issue area, but it makes me think about bringing people to the table that are involved with, say, the coordinated care organizations that have a whole bunch of money for addressing things like housing and food insecurity and all of those things, and just making sure that we are interwoven with all of those other enterprises so that when we do go to the legislature, we can say, hey, we are a critical partner and we are focused on youth and the future.
Well, thank you, Zan, and Brian. I think that as far as my introducing this, I appreciate these questions and comments. What I suggested to Jared and Bill yesterday was that, essentially we want to find out if the committee does in fact feel like this is a good place for the work of the committee, and it sounds like that's the consensus. If anyone doesn't agree, certainly want to hear from you. But otherwise, we really would sort of start in earnest and looking at what this means and how we would do it at the next committee meeting, which I think is conveniently about a month from now. So it gives us some time to share more materials and do some pre-work. So it sounds like this works for everyone, and I'm happy to answer any other questions, but otherwise I appreciate folks giving me the time to talk about it.
Thanks, Cord. Yes, that's right. We have a meeting 1 month from now. So if people want to think about this over the next month, and we will do some work behind the scenes and be able to dive in more next month. Any final thoughts on that before we move on? No? All right. Thank you, Cord. Let's see. Next, wanted to discuss a committee chair election. It's been a few meetings now that we have been without a committee chair. So I'm going to pass it over to Bill for that.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, this really can go one of, I will probably go lots of different ways, but the two main ones coming to mind would be, we could take, somebody could express an interest for both chair and co-chair, and we just kind of move to second the motion and vote on it now, or kind of table it and come back to it at another meeting. But the real thing is just to gauge interest. We're looking, as Jared said, for a chair and co-chair for this committee, and the soon, like we said, like if not this meeting, then the one in August. But it would be great to solidify those two positions, so we have the internal leadership, I guess, or just kind of a council member that's chair of this committee. And so again, we can enter, if anybody's just like, oh, I'd love to do this, you can throw your hat in the what's the saying, the pool, I don't know, the ring, I don't know where you throw your hat, but you can throw that. And then again, as well, we can do something, like you can voice that interest, and then we can act on it formally next meeting. But is anybody interested?
And I'll just add, it's not it's not a terrible amount of work. It really consists of just kind of my sending the agenda to you beforehand and getting your feedback and thoughts and just basically running through the agenda. Of course, it's a position to lead the committee, but it's not, aside from this current time commitment, it's not much more than that.
Jared, is there a bylaw reason that we need to have a chair of the committee, or could a committee exist without a chair, co-chair?
That's a great question. I think I might see if Melissa knows that.
All the bylaws I've seen are sort of written on the assumption that there is a chair and a co-chair. I'd have to see if there's actually a requirement. I think it's desired so that we have executive committee meetings that help steer the quarterly council meetings and larger ones. And so that the chairs from these committees are part of that executive committee. That's one key thing that pops to mind right off the bat. Anyone else? Like Cord, you've been around a while. Brian, anything else to add to that?
I mean, the first thought I had was it's worth looking at the bylaws and seeing if this is permissible, but I wonder if it could be that there is not a permanent chair, but that the committee can select a chair for the meeting at the call to order point. I don't know if a chair has to call the meeting to order. That may be the case. So then you'd have to find some way to do it. And Zan, you may know the answer to this even better than I do.
Well, I think that the only glitch is that if there's a desire for staff consultation with a council member about the agenda in advance, you have to know who it is in advance. Mm. And it does make sense in order to have continuity and kind of a planning horizon to have someone who is engaged in and kind of accountable that way. So, but I have to say also, just stepping aside, that I don't fully know who all on the council currently serves as chair and co-chair for all of our other committees. And it would be really useful to have that information before we move forward too, just so that we don't overcommit, because I know I'm a co-chair or vice chair for another committee.
This is Brian Detman, for the record. Yeah, good points. We can assemble, or maybe, I don't know, Melissa, maybe you're looking at the list. Yes, Commissioner Adjourn, you are co-chair of the Policy, Rules, and Research. I think I saw Cord kind of waving his hand. Maricela is the chair of the Youth Committee, although she is going to move into an overall council chair role because Robin is going to step aside in the chair role. She'll still continue as a council member. Tabidi is our vice chair and would have been the natural person to have as the next chair, but Maricela is also in her last year, and it just seemed like important to get one of our youth person who started as a youth member and is now in her sort of about to be in her 8th and final year as a council member into the role of YDC chair. So I'm pretty excited about that. But there's a couple of the folks, and maybe, I don't know, Melissa, if you want to fill in.
Sure. There is the Juvenile Justice Committee, and Molly Rogers is the chair of that one. And then Zan, you mentioned your co-chair with Diana Rojas for the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee. And that is it. And I mentioned that there is the executive committee, so the chairs or co-chairs of each committee also are expected to attend and contribute to those executive committee meetings.
It seems that with this strategic plan, it might be good if the chair is not someone who is about to roll off and leave, just in that if time goes, if more time is needed for the strategic plan, which so often happens, it just strikes me that continuity would probably be important in this position.
Well, thank you all, and unless there's further discussion on this, I saw the note in there with Zan to just table this, and but definitely please do think on it and your availability and interest, and we'll pick it back up in August. And like Zan said, it would also be great if the committee was fully represented for this big election forthcoming. Yeah. I'll pass it back to you, Jared.
Okay, thanks, Bill. All right, we are doing well on time. We're a few minutes ahead of schedule. That's pretty much it for the agenda today, other than public comment. So I will pause, and if there are any members of the public who would like to make a comment, now is the time.
I guess I will here. I'm Shanna Lamar, and I'm the Chief Development Officer for Friends of the Children. And our CEO, Terry Sorensen, forwarded me the link about a week ago. And she said, I just really would love to learn more about the work that you're doing. And it was really fun to I took a lot of notes and was off camera, and just want to say thank you for the work that you've done this past year. And it's exciting to see where you're going. We are an organization that's been in existence for 30 years. Our headquarters is based in Portland. And what we do is we pair youth that are going through just really traumatic experiences. We pair them with a friend, which is a paid professional mentor for 12 plus years. So we start at ages 4 through 6 through high school graduation. And it's no matter what. And it's just really important that they have that one individual in their life that kind of is sticking by them through the challenges that they're seeing. We also we work really close with the child welfare system, and really hope to help keep families from entering into the system, but also to provide support when it's there. And what's really unique about kind of the work that you're doing is we've expanded into many different rural communities. So we have a chapter in Klamath Basin that has expanded out to the Chiloquin Reservation. We're also, and then our Central Oregon chapter has expanded into La Pine. And I'm now kind of co-leading some expansion efforts into La Grande. So we're really excited to, and we're kind of in that feasibility stage. Is there need? We met with the county sheriff, Cody Bowen, last week, and just hearing kind of, where the need is in the community, not as many community partners that are helping to work with youth and families. And then something else that's unique about our work that we've just kind of launched into probably about the last 5 years is we're doing more 2-gen work. So we're working with the entire family and providing that support, not just with the child, but with the entire family, whether it's mom, the caregiver, mom, dad, and then all of the siblings. So addressing some of those things of how can we find food, housing, all the different services that they may need. So just wanted to introduce myself. Appreciate your time. Love to partner. And if there's, a way that we can be beneficial or help in conversations, we're happy to do that. And we are just excited to continue to, move our model throughout the state of Oregon and really throughout the country as well.
Thank you, Shanna. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the comment. Any other members of the public? I don't think I see any other members of the public. All right, well, unless there are any final thoughts, I think that takes care of it. Probably give you 5 minutes back to your day.
Jared, I just shared the next couple meetings on the screen so everyone can see when those are, if they're not on your calendar already.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so next one is that last week of August 25th, from 12 to 1, and then the next quarterly council meeting, September 14th. All right, well, with that, is there a council member who would like to close us out?
I will also close. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Melissa, is the September 14th meeting in person or hybrid or remote?
That is in person.
Cool.
We have to provide the hybrid option for those folks who absolutely cannot join us in person, but we will be meeting in person. At that one will be at the PSB in Salem.
Okay, Great. Thank you so much. See y'all
Thank you for
then.
checking.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.